My name is Janice Bellucci, and I'm the state organizer for RSOL in California.
Mm-hmm. And what do you do professionally?
I'm an attorney and have been a member of the state bar for about 30 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what would you like to tell us about what's happening with the registry?
The registry is significantly damaging families in California and throughout our nation. It's tearing families apart quite literally. There are situations where fathers cannot, in fact, sleep in their own homes because the home is located near a school or violating some residency requirement that was passed long after, in fact, they committed their crime.
Well, don't you think that's important as a parent to protect your children?
It's absolutely important to protect the children of everyone's child, and this includes the children of somebody who in fact has committed a wrong and who has in fact paid their debt to society by being imprisoned. And unfortunately in the state of California, it's a situation that never goes away. At this point in time, once a person is put on the registry, they're on the registry for life. We don't have a tiered system unlike other states where basically if it's a minor offense, then you can in fact be off the registry in 10 years or less.
Well, what would you say to a victim or victim's advocate who says, well, I want somebody like that on the registry for life?
The fact is that most people who are on the registry are not the ones who offend. The people who are the offenders are usually family members, or there's somebody who is a family friend, somebody who has access to a child. And so you really don't need to be worried about the person who lives a few blocks away. That's not who's going to commit this offense in most times.
What do you find most frustrating as an attorney litigating in this area or working in this area?
I'm an attorney working in this area, and I find the most frustrating part is the fact that we have U.S. citizens who are being denied their basic civil rights, and folks who in fact are being jobless, homeless, their families are being harmed in every way, and this is not the way our society and democracy is to act. We have safeguards in the U.S. Constitution such as ex post facto law prohibition, and we also have due process in our Constitution, and unfortunately neither one of those safeguards are being provided to our U.S. citizens who in fact are on the registry.
Well, hasn't the U.S. Supreme Court said that there's no ex post facto violation with the registry?
The Supreme Court has made that ruling. Unfortunately, it was based on some faulty data, and that data, they believe, established that this was not a punitive measure. But since that case was decided, we have plenty of facts now to look at and to correct the record and to let everybody know, including the federal Supreme Court, that in fact it is a punitive measure.
Mm-hmm. What are you seeing in California with juveniles becoming offenders? Is that a problem?
It's a growing problem that juveniles are being labeled sex offenders and being put on the registry. The fact is that one teenager can take a picture of their genitals and send it to another teenager, and the person who sends that could in fact become a registered sex offender, and again for life. This is something they will never be able to get away from unless in fact we change the law.
Do you think parents are aware of how soon or how easily their child could be on the registry?
I think most parents have no idea of how their child could end up on this registry literally in a blink of an eye. And you know, another situation, of course, that we have are the Romeo and Juliet cases where one teenager may be having sexual relations with another teenager, and the parent finds out about that and gets upset and in fact pursues these legal remedies. But the fact is that this is not what it's all about. It's supposed to protect our children from adults who in fact are taking advantage of them. So what's happened is the law has gotten skewed, and it's being used for inappropriate reasons.
Well, do you think there's any purpose, or could the registry be effective, or is there a better means of doing what it's supposed to be doing?
Personally, I think the registry is so defective that it needs to be replaced and, or in fact, eradicated entirely. There's all kinds of misinformation that gets on these registries, and even more importantly, though, it really violates the privacy rights of the offenders. So we've got people who may have committed a crime 40 years ago, who in fact are on the registry that didn't exist at the time they committed the offense, and that in fact just flies in the face of all, again, certainly ex post facto laws. And the other thing is that some of these folks who are registrants are being hunted down by vigilantes or in some cases by victims of other sexual acts, and they're being harmed, physically harmed, and up to the point of even being murdered. So I have personal knowledge of someone who was on the registry who was attacked, and an attempt to kill him was made. Fortunately, he survived the attack, but the fact is this was somebody who didn't know him, had never met him, found his name and address on the registry, and that was all he needed to attack him.
That person has actually come forth and written a book. Would you like to talk about that, or do you not feel comfortable?
I would be happy to talk about it. His name is Frank Lindsay, and he has written a book about his experiences. He was attacked at the very end of the book, actually as they were editing it and readying it for print. And so a young man broke into his home and was waiting for him, and when he came home, attacked him with a hammer and tried to kill him. It was actually the second break-in of the day for the assailant. In the other case, he was frightened and went away, but in this case, he did attack Frank. And Frank was able to defend himself with the 1-gallon jug of water that he happened to have in his hand. But that young man has, in fact, now been convicted of the crime that he did commit, and he has been sentenced to 13 years and 4 months in prison himself.
And actually, Frank reached out to that guy? Is that...
He did. Frank is a remarkable, caring human being. He understands that the young man who attacked him was in fact a victim of sexual violence himself, and in fact Frank has reached out to the young man and is helping him, the young man, get the kind of care that he needs and deserves while he's in prison. Okay.
And we're not doing a commercial for the book, but just in case someone is interested, what's the title of the book?
It's called We're All in This Together, and it's again by Frank Lindsay.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about, you lobbied significantly or worked in lobbying in Washington, D.C. Can you talk about the process in a brief way that maybe most Americans don't understand about how laws are actually come into effect?
Sure. Most laws come about because of, in reaction to an event that has occurred, hence things like Megan's Law and the like. And it's to address a problem. So what we need to let people know now, what we need to let our elected officials know, is that there is a problem right now, and that problem is, again, that a large group of citizens and their families are, in fact, being harmed significantly by the Adam Walsh Act and its implementation. So the act, the law, we understand is supposed to protect, and we do believe and understand that our children do need to be protected, but unfortunately the law itself, and certainly the way it's being implemented, is not having that effect. So we need to educate our legislators in as calm a way as we can and let them know about what in fact is occurring, because in many cases they have no knowledge of this. I myself was ignorant of this fact until about a year ago when I read Frank's book.
And so before that, how would you classify your approach to the problem, or your reaction to the problem before you read Frank's book?
Before I read Frank's book, I was not sympathetic to the cause. And even today, I guess I'm surprised that I am, being a woman, and I do have 2 daughters. But the fact is that this is such an egregious violation of some basic constitutional rights that I'm willing and able to go beyond my personal circumstances and to address this issue as a lawyer. But also, the fact is I don't feel in danger. I don't feel I'm not afraid of somebody because he or she is a registered sex offender. The fact is I know that they too are citizens of our country, and they are due their basic civil rights. I do believe there are some human beings who need to be incarcerated and who have such problems, psychological, emotional, and otherwise, that they do need to be incarcerated, and hopefully that they too will be given the kind of care they need to be healed. But that's a very few number of people. All these other people, I'm afraid, are in fact, innocent victims, again, of a law and the implementation of the law that have gone awry.
What would be a step for me to take if I was interested in changing some of this stuff?
Well, I think it's to reach out and join a state organization. The RSOL organization does have state organizations, and it's really the state organizations that primarily are focused on what's going on to individuals. So the national organization is looking at policy, and by getting involved in these organizations, you will be able to add your voice and let our elected officials know that things are going awry here, again, in the Adam Walsh Act and how it's being implemented, as well as other jurisdictions which are just carrying this way too far. I know in Orange County in Southern California now, the county has passed legislation that would, in fact, prohibit anybody who's on the registry from going to a public park or a public beach and other public meeting places like that without first getting a type of license, I'll call it, but getting something in writing from the county.
Is there any documentation about how many assault cases have happened on these beaches or anything like that?
I don't think that there are. Again, I believe it's really an overreaction to a few number of incidents, which are very unfortunate, and there are, in fact, people who've been harmed physically and otherwise by those incidents. But the fact is that the punishment needs to be equivalent to the crime. And what we have here is something that's just gone overboard, and it's reached too far. It's basically harming too many lives here. And again, if we look back to our U.S. Constitution and our U.S. Constitution, you know, some basic fundamental rights of every U.S. citizen here are being denied.
Okay, and like Florida and other states, California seems to have taken an approach where you were talking about in the city of San Francisco, it's very difficult for people to find housing.
It is my understanding in the city of San Francisco, it is impossible for anybody on the registry to find housing that would in fact not violate a residency requirement. And there are other locations too where it's difficult if not impossible. So what's happening is in fact then registrants are being forced into some outlying areas. Oh, by the way, there are very few jobs out in those areas, and so it's already almost impossible for somebody on the registry to get a job, but they're making it even more difficult for that to happen by basically denying them residency in many urban areas.
And as a citizen, how does that, I mean, I understand basic human rights, but how would that affect me? Are there any unintended consequences, I guess, from these people not being able to find housing and jobs and things like that?
Absolutely. There's I'm outraged as a citizen, quite frankly, that people are being forced to live under bridges, and in one jurisdiction the only place they could go was basically to live on the county, at the steps of the county building. And families are being literally torn apart where they can't live under the same roof, and that just flies in the face of justice in our country. This should not be happening.
And finally, there's been some international organizations that have actually condemned some of these policies in certain ways.
And you know, I'm not personally aware of those, but it makes sense to me. We are in fact violating again our citizens' basic rights, and I'm encouraged to hear that in fact other international organizations are looking at this.
Okay. Any final thoughts?
We need to realize that we have a civil rights movement. That's what this is all about, and we need to band together. And I think we need to remember to start that with educating others on this issue. And I do believe that as soon as enough people understand what indeed is going on, we'll reach that tipping point, and then the next day people will say, well, of course, we need to provide basic civil rights to these individuals.